Good morning, everyone. This is Nikachu, Merfolk Master, and we are here to talk Magic the Gathering. This is the morning talk show where we discuss all things Magic the Gathering. We have Q&A Magic discussion. Welcome to Coffee and MTG for December 29th of 2020. Not many days left in 2020, but we have quite the show for all of you. It's actually quite interesting. There is a little bit of debate within the Amulet Titan community. Amulet Titan, one of the most powerful decks in Modern, has gotten so many upgrades and so many bannings as a result of their power. We've seen, we've seen Summer Bloom get banned from this deck. We have seen the banning of Once Upon a Time. The deck has gotten many upgrades thanks to Dryad of Elysian Grove, that they can now use Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, in their deck without actually having to play any mountains. The deck has gotten stronger, has become a force to be reckoned with. But is it well positioned? Is it even good anymore? The Amulet Titan community, they're trying to figure that one out for themselves. And we have two authorities on Amulet Titan, two masters, co-hosts of the podcast Titan Talk. I would love to thank our special guests, Jose Moniz and also Jack Potter. Welcome to Coffee and MTG.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
So for those who are not familiar with you, for those who are not familiar with your podcast or with yourselves, just in general, maybe just give us a little bit of a background on each of you to get people to know, why are you guys the authorities on Amulet Titan, and and maybe a little background about yourselves.
Yeah, go for it, Jack.
All right. So, hi, I'm Jack. So I started Titan Talk around, I want to say 3-4 months ago, maybe a little less. Originally having Francisco Pavlicek, FLUs, as well as Jacek coming on. Fran was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately it was a little too early for him, so he's not joining us today.
Fran's been on the channel many times. We all familiar with Fran.
Yeah,
he loves talking. He loves talking about Titan. I can tell you that.
He sure does. He sure does, and that's a big reason why I invited him to be on the podcast. Since when that guy is talking about Titan, he doesn't stop. So, yeah. I'm Jack. I've been playing Amulet for around a year now. So the least amount for between the three hosts on the podcast, and since then I've been playing absolutely nothing but Amulet. Until recently. So, yeah.
So what's up with that? But Jose Moniz has something to say about it. What about it, Jose?
Well, first of all, my name is Jose Moniz. I'm Portuguese. I'm a 25-year-old. Recently delved into the Moto scene with the start of the pandemic. I've been playing Amulet Titan variants for about a year and a half. I got introduced to the deck via F. Paulus. Fran was sort of an inspiration for me to start picking up the deck. I was mostly a limited player and grinder in Lisbon, so making that leap into Modern and Moto was definitely a very cool experience. I got to know Jack from it too, and the podcast just came to be. And unlike Jack, I'd say I have mostly been playing Amulet still and thoroughly enjoy it.
And you still think it's still well positioned, despite the fact that you said on Twitter, what's all this negative feedback on Amulet Titan? Everyone's like, Amulet Titan's not going, but I'm still winning. Look, I'm still getting trophies. I'm still making the ticks and the play point. What's going on here? Everyone's saying the sky is falling. What's going on?
I think the main reason why people would say it falls out of favor is mostly because from the point where Amulet was, I'd say, a more dominant force, not that it still isn't, but there really weren't any other Titan decks available, right? And now we've seen the rise of Green-White Reclaimer, aka Eladamri's Toolbox on MTG Goldfish, and that deck obviously gets carried by Titan, as well as some decent variants that have been popping up, like a blue-green Titan / mid-range deck. So there are a lot of Titan options, which from the player base standpoint, it leads you to a crossroad where now you might not be interested in playing mostly Amulet if you want a Titan strategy. So that leads results, I'd say.
Reminds me of when, you know, humans came out, like the Merfolk community is like, well, these are both Aether Vial decks. And
Yeah.
one of these Aether Vial decks is actually winning a lot of tournaments right now. So now people are at a crossroads between the choice: do I still play Amulet, or are we going to play this Reclaimer version that is also putting up really good, strong, solid results? Yeah. So maybe let's start with you, Jack. Why would one want to put the amulets aside for something else?
So basically, here's what I've been thinking about the deck lately. So within the last month or so, the meta has become has become increasingly more toxic towards Amulet. We had a really cool discussion about this when we were recording the podcast last week. Unfortunately, that episode was not able to be released due to some issues with the guest. But so one issue that I've been finding with Amulet is that. So here we see the modern metagame. Of course, 4-color on math, tier 0. The deck is, and the stats will back it up. This is the best deck in the format, and it's been it's sort of been like a love-hate relationship when it comes to that matchup for me. If you can resolve a fast Titan, of course, you'll do well, but it feels that the issue that I have with that deck in particular is the fact that not only is it a control deck, but it's also controlling the game at the same pace of you. So with cards like Growth Spiral, with cards like Uro, they're always
they ramp just as good as you do.
Exactly, right? So they're
control deck ramping as much as my Titan deck. What is going on? What world do we live in here?
It is the world of 2019-2020 Magic upon us. That's what it is. But yeah, so that was a big component as to why, and just like with Omnath just doing so many busted things, like being able to go Omnath, play Fetch Land, play the Fairy Hero Dominaria, uptick, leave up Aether Gust, like okay. But yeah. So I personally think that matchup's not great, but and then like looking at other things, you have Roblox Shadow, Heliod, Hammer Time, all these decks can play very fast games and can end the game very quickly, especially Hammer Time, which has of course been picking up a lot of popularity. One of the issues that Amulet struggles with is the fact that it doesn't interact. Amulet is a very proactive strategy, and so if you were able to go under Amulet and just end the game by turn 2 to turn 3, you're going to favor in the matchup a lot of the time. So that's a big reason as to why Hammer Time beats up an Amulet. Heliod, pretty harsh matchup for Amulet. Moto, not so much, just because if you have the patience to play through Infinite Life, it's not too difficult. But even then,
zombies can beat Infinite Life.
Yeah, but I've done it multiple times, and it really on Moto that matchup really comes down to: do I have time to play this game, or do I have, or how good is the life EV to play out this game here? But yeah, Roblox Shadow. I've heard a lot of different opinions about this matchup. I personally think it's unfavored. I know, just say I think you think it is favored. My testing partner Freemania, he thinks it's favored. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a very interesting matchup. But again, like looking at the matchup, Rakdos mid range is just Blood Moon deck naturally going to be favored against Amulet. Obosh, Blood Moon deck going to be favored against Amulet. Eldarmor's Toolbox, however, though. So, or Grim Reclaimer. But yeah, so this matchup is very, very interesting from both sides as lately. So even though lately I have not been playing Modern at all, I've actually moved over to Vintage within the last few days. But
everyone's jumping ship to Vintage.
Vintage is great.
Is that the saving grace to any
people do not give
format?
Vintage enough credit. It is really an amazing format.
I'm not a huge fan.
It really is.
I played it once. I was not impressed.
I mean, you can play Merfolk in Vintage Nikachu, so.
I'm thinking about it. There's some new addition. You can have a turn 1 win with Black Lotus Mox, Paradigm Shift, Exile My Library, Thassa's Oracle, and win the game.
Yeah.
That's spicy.
Yeah, it's great. So But yeah, so before I made the jump over to Vintage, I was playing a lot of Green Reclaimer. And when the deck was first coming around, originally I thought Amulet was favored. Then the deck started picking up more steam. I started playing the deck from the Reclaimer side more. And as time has gone on, I've actually considered the Reclaimer to be slightly favored in this matchup.
Okay.
So there are two very different decks, of course, being two Titan decks. Amulet being the more explosive one, and Reclaimer being the more flexible, consistent, but slower option, right? And
way more resistant to Blood Moon.
Yes, exactly, right? Because you're playing and it plays 4 to sometimes 5 basics. Reclaimer plays around 5 to 6. And
you can dig for the basics too with the
Reclaimer finds your basics. You're able to, with the basics that you find, you're able to cast Call, and you're able to find things like Static Apparition to answer them, or use Dryad, and of course all those timestamp things to get around Blood Moon.
Yeah.
So it really is a lot better against the Blood Moon decks in my opinion. And so really just I find that the flexibility that Reclaimer has over Amulet makes it so the deck is favored against it, and just having of course 4 copies of Path game 1 definitely helps a lot. Post board, having access to cards like Aven Mind Sensor, one of the best cards in the deck. Also, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, of course, being an amazing card. If it weren't for Dryad, this Reclaimer deck would not exist. And
I hate this card.
I
really hate this card. This is a stupid card.
Yeah,
I don't really expect them to ban it either because it's new.
I hate it too.
Honestly, I do as well. One of the big things that brought me into Amulet was the whole puzzle situation of the deck, and with the printing of Dryad, that kind of just went out the window for the most part. It's really just now it's at first I was I can do all this, and then get my Slayers, get my Sun home, and do all these things, and now it's just pew. So with Dryad though, from my experience of playing both sides, I found that the Reclaimer deck is a lot stronger as a Dryad deck in comparison to as a Titan deck. So the fact that you're able to abuse things like Dryad plus Reclaimer just makes it it's just so many different interactions within this deck that I think makes it favored against Amulet. And again, so with Herb Piles in general, it's quite tough with Aethergust thing. Mill, of course, very good. You better have a shuffler or you're not winning that game. Adnaz, you're naturally a combo deck is going to be favored against Amulet. Tron, I still stand by. Tron is a good matchup for Amulet. Always has been, always will be. And also as of late, I've seen a lot of Oops decks, as in Ipsil Spells or Reverend Belcher. Those decks are popping up a lot as well. Belcher, a lot harder for Amulet to deal with. Oops, slightly more easier for Amulet to deal with if you're playing Scouts, because you can instant speed Bajuka Bog them game 1, and you also have Relic post board. So going through all those decks, right? It's a lot of what I found is that Amulet is not able to really keep up with what the rest of the metagame is doing. I had this discussion with Fran 2 weeks ago on the podcast, and Fran made a really good point. The format more or less has power crept up to what the rest of the format. The rest of the format has power crept up to what Amulet is doing. So look
at Tron, 2.5% of the metagame. You're not even the big mana deck anymore, Tron.
No. And plus, I mean, Cleansing Wildfire just kind of made Tron go out of there, right? So it really just becomes the format has caught up to what the deck is trying to do in terms of power level, and is doing it at an even faster rate. And that is what I think is causing Amulet to be very well unpositioned in the meta. And that's why I'm off the deck at the moment.
All right, Jose, what's your counter argument? What do you see that the naysayers don't?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's something that I see that others don't, and I don't think it comes to personal deck building choices or heuristics. I just tend to find that a lot of the, for example, using the, if you could pop up the list of the goldfish decks again, House was saying that the reclaimer decks are more favored against Blood Moon, which to be fair, they obviously are due to their deck construction, high number of green fetch lands. They're naturally going to be better against Blood Moon. However, them being, I would say, a turn, maybe a turn and a half slower than Amulet, actually harms their chances of getting under it possibly, and getting a fast clock going.
Gotcha.
And also, if they're playing main deck Blood Moons, the matchup is going to be hard anyway, because both Rakdos midrange and mono red aggro are the decks that are more poised to be able to deal with Reclaimer, right? Reclaimer, for the most part, will not live to turn 2 against both those decks. They have a plethora of answers to each to the card at any point of the curve. So if you're counting on Reclaimer living against those matchups to get over the Blood Moon, it won't be a good game plan. As far as the Euro piles, as far as the Euro piles, which is definitely the most, I'd say, controversial matchup, I think it's your game 2 and 3 to lose. I think Amulet is extremely well positioned to crush game 1. So without them having access to Aether Gusts and their cards being extremely more reactive, if you play smart enough with your Titan triggers and prioritize getting a Cavern of Souls into play, the matchup becomes very, very, very favorable. Game 1. Obviously, game 2, they bring in the Aether Gusts and maybe the Ashioks, which are the almost the
sometimes
the
in the main deck, though, Aether Gust.
Also sometimes in the main deck, yeah, but you can't necessarily play around that. If it happens, it happens, right? And in those scenarios, you actually have some decent sideboard answers that you can play that either absolutely hammer the plan of Omnath decks like Boil.
So yeah, let's go over your side. This is your latest list you have?
This list, yeah. This list, I'm not playing the Boils. However, I'm playing just a straight up simple mana base, and I've been playing the aforementioned dead card in 2020 that people don't think it's playable enough, Tireless Tracker.
Tracker.
Full 4 copies. And if I didn't believe the card, I wouldn't just submit 4 trackers. I do think the card is very elegant solution to Blood Moon, either by getting under Blood Moon first and trying to accrue advantage, or versus the Euro decks to act as a threat before they get to the Gust turn. So people have, as they're playing Euro piles, they have the mindset of trying to get to the Aether Gust loop as fast as possible, and a turn 2 tracker versus, say, a Ren that they're playing can actually harm them significantly because it forces them to use the Gusts defensively. Right. So at that point, you're kind of putting a cog into, you're trying to mess with their plan of getting to the long game by putting a threat that not only answers in a way Ren and Ashiok, which is the public enemy number 1, while also putting pressure into their copies of Gust. Obviously, they're going to have almost infinite copies, as it seems like, when they start looping Mystic Sanctuaries and all that.
Right.
And that's why the full 4, you really want to hand with them in the starting hand. Also, to combat the aggro decks is the reason why 4 dismembers are there, right? I think Hammer Time is almost the polar opposite of the Euro piles. I think game 1, you are an absolute dog, and you probably won't win. I do think if you play the right sideboard cards for games 2 and 3, they actually become much more manageable. The latest version I've been trying out has 3 sideboard Force of Vigors. I think Force of Vigor is an absolute, it closes the door completely in some turns versus the Hammer Time decks. It just crushes them completely. Them attacking with a 20/20, and you just blocking with the Dryad, Force of Vigor their equipment, and you still get to kill their dude. Also deals with Sigarda's Aid. It's also a really good answer to Blood Moon. I think right now, and more than ever, it is interesting the tools that the decks are getting to adapt to, for example, the Titan matchups. So we see mostly Blood Moon and Gust. All of the decks, most of the bad matchups per se, are playing those cards to fight you. And that actually helps the deck building and the sideboard building a lot, because in a more open metagame, you'd have to worry about, say, not only those two, but like Confounding Conundrum, Damping Sphere, more Ashiok, and it's very hard to attack 5 different sideboard cards than 2.
Right.
2 is much more simplistic. So you get to crunch your sideboard to only beat the bad matchups. And because your shell, your 60 cards, are already so powerful, as the meta has shown, and as the past has shown, that it's still a very solid deck with just incredible resilience in the main deck and a lot of toolbox that you can get to fetch for certain answers, that you are able to devote a lot of sideboard slots just to fight the bad matchups.
Right. So from the Titans perspective, or the Amulet's perspective, Modern's pretty narrow right now in terms of the threats that are coming out against them, which obviously can be an advantage because, like you said, you can dedicate more sideboard slots to the threats that you're looking at. So you just I don't care about anything in this Death Shadow matchup. The Blood Moon is the only thing that I worry about, or the same thing with a
for the most part, the bad matchups are exactly that. Are decks that have their game plan, their plan A, and usually their plan B of directly fighting your deck is actually counterproductive. So say for a deck like Shadow, Rakdos Death Shadow, the fact that they're playing a turn 3 Blood Moon means that they're slowing down on pressure for the most part. It means that they are not presenting a clock fast enough, for example, or they think it's good enough. So it actually helps your plan A, which is always to survive to land a Titan, right? Obviously, Blood Moon being in play harms the possibility of you playing a Titan, but if you narrow your answers in the sideboard to actually fight those cards, you'll find that you're more often than not tempo positive, which is a really big key in these types of matchups. And that's why I think Shadow is actually a very good matchup. I think if you are able to land a Titan, other of them having Temur Battle Rage in hand and they've pushed a lot of damage, I think it is very hard for you to lose as soon as you land one. And
I heard the problem for Shadow these days is basically Titan decks and an army of zombies.
Which again, they will bring narrow cards like Kozilek's Return to deal with that, and they are clunky cards.
I didn't even think about that application of Kozilek's Return.
Yeah, but there are actually clunky cards that stop their main engine and the way of actually fighting through your aggression, which is Dorks and Discard. Discard and Pressure is always a surefire way of actually beating a Titan deck. Them actually taking the foot out of the accelerator, I don't know if you use that expression, but taking the foot off the gas. Exactly. Taking the foot off the gas to actually try and play these reactive clunky cards, for the most part, will actually harm their chances. Obviously, Blood Moon and Gust are just cards that you have to deal with for the most part, but you have the tools to fight them. And if they are harming their 60 enough to play those cards that can be dealt with, it actually helps your chances. So in those types of decks, say Hammer Time, for example, has almost no hate to Primeval Titan because they are a natural predator of them in game 1, right? So they're not going to devote a lot of hate to those decks because they are already so favored. They only have a couple of Damping Spheres. Yeah. Those are deltable because you're already bringing in Force of Vigor and Reclamation Sage to fight those decks. Right. So it actually serves. It doesn't really help. Their sideboard plan of bringing cards in actively helps your sideboard cards too. And you see that in a lot of decks. So if I'm not mistaken, the Reclaimer strategy, it's also to bring in Aven Mind Sensor to fight your shuffle effect, your search effect, which doesn't work as intended for the most part because you're already bringing in four dismembers in the matchup.
Right.
So the cards that you're already bringing in naturally actively deal with the cards that are problematic. And you'll find that a lot in a lot of the Titan sideboard cards, at least the ones that I've been trying out. And I'd like to give a shout out to EDB, Eduardo Borges, who sort of, I traded some ideas about how to sideboard correctly for the meta. And cards like Tracker and Dismember work perfectly because they are already very good in the hate that you're going to get brought on, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that you're playing like these 8 super powerful cards that you can actually use in multiple matchups, they're tremendously versatile. You're able to dedicate some sideboard slots to actually fight, like cover some holes on the bad matchups. The top 16 decks that we were seeing, I'd say that the only matchup where we are tremendously unfavored, I'd say it's Ad Nauseam. I think you have a shot against most decks. Ad Nauseam is just very difficult to attack for the most part, which is a bit troublesome because I believe the last challenge we had 2 Ad Nauseam decks in the top 8. Mm-hmm. I think that deck is very difficult to attack. There's not a good angle of attack unless you're splashing a different color, which is also a thing that a lot of Amulet players have been doing to actually combat some axes of the metagames, right? You've seen a lot of players splashing Boil to fight the blue decks, and successfully so. We've seen some lists splashing white for Path to Exile and Celestial Purge, which helps the Hammer Time and Shadow matchups immensely. I think the range of cards and the range of possibilities that you have with the Amulet deck makes it so it's never going to be a dog in the metagame. Conceptually, the way it's built and the way you can build the sideboard makes it so it really can't be anything other than a solid meta choice as long as you know what you're doing.
So your advantage is very good sideboard that interacts with this narrow metagame, but also leveraging the 1 turn faster that you're going to be with Amulet under every single other deck. So still, and personally for me, I am way more terrified about playing against Amulet as a Merfolk player than the Aladamri version.
Yeah,
because of the speed. There are so many types. There's so many games that play out just way faster that I don't even get my game going. I can't even get a creature on the battlefield, and I'm basically already dead in the water. Whereas I have a lot more room to win if the game is playing out a lot slower. Oh, you play like turn 1 Elvish Reclaimer. Okay, I kill it or dismember. Or I dismember it or I Pithing Needle it or something, and now we get to play an actual game. So well, how about this? You went over. So you're saying your plan against Blood Moon is just to go underneath Blood Moon?
I think there are 2 strategies depending on the type of Blood Moon deck, right?
Okay.
So for example,
talk about that because we're not going to beat Blood Moon unless we know how to exactly beat Blood Moon.
Exactly. So in my opinion, the Rakdos midrange and the mono red aggro are 2 different Blood Moon decks, right? The mono red aggro uses Blood Moon, I'd say the most effective way possible, which is to pile on pressure early, and then making sure they have this hammer of a card that says, you have to deal with this or I will win.
The 1 card win condition.
Exactly. And they pair it up with, obviously, an absolutely painless Blood Moon mana base for the most part, and pressure. Those are the type of decks that Blood Moon is actually worrisome. And you, for the most part, the only way you're going to be able to combat Blood Moon is to trying to either deal with their board so that as they develop Blood Moon, they don't have any pressure. And you enter this like a cat and mouse game of, will I find my Force of Vigor or Rex Sage or a threat that I can play with just 1 forest if I have one, before they actually get to develop a lot of threats.
What about game 1? Are you just like dumping game 1 or you just hope they don't draw Blood Moon?
I think game 1, again, because of the way Titan decks are built, there can actually be a big difference in matchups. For example, if you are playing Arboreal Grazer as your turn 1 accelerant, this matchup becomes much more manageable than if you're playing, say, Sakura Tribe Scouts. So there's this nuance in deck building that can actually make just a standard stock list be like from a 40-60 matchup to a 60-40 just for some card selections. And
you split them in this list.
Yeah, I've split them. Right now, I'm currently playing 4 Tribe Scouts because I tend to respect red decks slightly less now that I think the format is getting a bit more combo-y. So as Ad Nauseam rises, Sakura Tribe Scout gains a lot more value because the mono red decks are just a natural dog to Ad Nauseam. So I'm just starting to adapt Sakura Tribe Scouts. But for example, an addition of playing a Grazer or a Scout can dramatically change the matchup. So I'd say game 1, the plan is just, if you get to slam a Titan, if they don't see Blood Moon, I think you are heavily favored.
Okay.
If they do see Blood Moon, you have to be able to deal with the threats as soon as possible. Maybe you already have a Dryad in play. Maybe they don't have the Flame Slash. or a way to remove it, they probably will. And the matchup will go downhill fast if they get to apply pressure and Blood Moon. But even when they do play Blood Moon, for the most part, if you are able to land a Titan, they still cannot, for the most part, beat a 6/6 unless they go into the Obosh plan. So if the game goes long enough that they get to play Obosh, then it gets a bit worrisome. So for sideboard, you want either a mix of answers to Blood Moon and an answer to their threats. So Engineered Explosives comes in. Tracker, I've been bringing Tracker in, which seems very weird against the aggro decks, but serving as a roadblock and a card that you can play under a Blood Moon or with just one forest can actually serve some purpose. The people I've talked to are sort of divided on it, because it seems weird to put a 3-mana 3/2 against an aggro deck, but it just serves as a mini roadblock that can actually dig you a card deeper in a way.
Better than playing nothing.
Exactly. It's better. It's just better.
These cards all dead. At least you have something to put onto the battlefield.
Exactly. And it can actually just swing a game that they are heavily depending on Blood Moon, for example. I can feel, and I think Jack will agree with me here, I can know when a player just kept a hand on Blood Moon alone. If they go Mountain Go, you know they have a Blood Moon. There is no way a mono red deck keeps a hand without a 1-drop that doesn't have a Blood Moon post sideboard. So you actually get to play around that card a lot easily because it's telegraphed from the start, right? If they play, like, I'd say turn 1, turn 2, and they just do nothing, I know they're banking on the strength of Blood Moon. Also, Blood Moon has an advantage that if you are able to deal with it, say with a Rex Sage or Force of Vigor, Blood Moon actively helps you ramp. What I mean by that is you can play bounce lands while the Blood Moon is in play.
Right.
And if you end of turn get to Force of Vigor it out, or Reclaimer it, or Reclamation Sage it, you actually advanced mana much more than you should have. So a Reclamation Sage in those scenarios is actually backbreaking, and Blood Moon is actively helping your game.
Sword sometimes then.
Exactly. And you're able to leverage that as best as possible. While the Rectos deck is more of a discard deck that tries to close with Blood Moon. It is a different approach, right? It plays Blood Moon in order to try and close the door and having a threat in play before, which might be Magmatic Channeler, might be Hazoret at the top deck. Maybe they just play a Liliana. In those cases, the answers are mostly the same, but Tracker gains a lot more value in this matchup.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have a lot more time because they're not nearly as putting the clock on you.
Exactly, which actually helps you too. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just say, when it comes to this matchup in particular, I like cards like Tracker a lot more in these styles of matchups, like against the Gruul mid-range deck, simply because, like as opposed to the Obosh deck, those decks are trying to close the game out as fast as possible, right? Whereas in these situations, you're really you have a lot more time when it comes to playing these mid-range matchups. And so that is so I will agree with just about Tracker and this sort of thing here. But when it comes to all those Obosh decks, personally, I don't think it's the one axis you want to be fighting on. Simply because the one issue I have with bringing in Tracker in those sorts of matchups is you really are not just like, I'm trying how to say this. It's like it's a card that a lot of time that if you were spending your turn doing this instead of trying to like answer their threats, I think you're going to be losing.
No, I agree, but that's why you play the Tracker when you literally can't play anything else, right? Like if you're under a Blood Moon and you only have a forest, Tracker is more often than not going to be the best play you can have. And that best play you can have can actually leverage you enough or draw you like that card deeper into a Force of Vigor or Rex Sage that can actually change the game. So
it's like a really clunky cycler.
I mean, okay. Even a really clunky cycler gains a lot more potential when it doesn't cost green against a Blood Moon deck, right?
Because it sounds like Jack was like, you're playing a card for a bad situation that's not going to be meaningful enough. But I guess from your current point of view, you know what, this sinking 3 mana or really 5 mana into a card that can cycle into maybe that answer to Blood Moon, which apparently you have.
And it's not just that. It's not just that. So their plan goes through aggression, right? They are going to have to deal with the tracker. Maybe it just costs a bolt, but maybe that healing solve and that card you get to dig, they can change the course of the game. It's much better than say
one bolt to the tracker is one bolt not to your face.
Exactly. Like it saves you time. The key matchup, the key word in these matchups is time. You need to get time to play a Titan and to be alive to get to that. And Blood Moon stops your main game plan of Titaning, and their pressure cuts you on time, right? So they have these 2 axes of attack. You're bringing in the Rex Sage and the Force of Vigors for the Blood Moon in particular. And if you feel like you're short on those answers, for example, I don't think I'd bring 4 trackers. In this configuration that you're showing, I'm definitely interested in bringing 4 trackers. Right now that I'm playing 3 Force of Vigor in the sideboard, if I was playing 4 trackers in the sideboard, I wouldn't bring all 4. You know what I mean? In this configuration, fighting against Blood Moon, in this deck in particular, it lacks a bit. So tracker gets brought in. And it's not a shabby card in the slightest.
Can you just slightly tell me what you get with Primeval Titan when you're under a Blood Moon? Are you just getting more basics to like empty your hand?
Yeah. More basics. The key first you get basics to try and stabilize. Then you never want to get Talaria Wests. The reason being, you want Talaria Wests to be in your deck. So if you get to draw a Dryad, you can play a Dryad and transmute with the basics or with the Blood Moon lands. So it actually accrues a lot of value. You can also do that even if the Dryad has been, even if someone has played a Blood Moon after the Dryad, you're actually incentivized to bring in more forests. So even because of layering, your non-basics will only tap for red, but your basics will still tap for rainbow mana. So you can still transmute Talaria West for, say, Reclamation Sage, Summoner's Pact for Reclamation Sage. Maybe you can Explosives for 3 to deal with the Blood Moon. And you can bring in all sorts of threads. After the basics, I usually just get bounce lands because bounce lands are going to lose value in your deck while under a Blood Moon. And if you get to destroy the Blood Moon, you've ramped immensely. So that's like the order of business, I'd say, when searching with Blood Moon.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, usually with me, you get your basics right away. Then usually I'll grab like Field of Valakut out right away, just so once that Blood Moon is out and those cards are unlocked, you immediately are getting the value off of those 2 cards. Which of course, once those cards are going off, you are going to win the game. And then of course then the rest really doesn't matter as long as you're not grabbing your Talaria West.
Yeah.
So sort of maybe in the end, what I'm gathering here is Jose says this deck is still good. I mean, with enough strategy and tight play, it's still got enough power to compete. But now what I'm hearing, I think where I hear more from Jack is like, if I have the choice between the Reclaimer Titan and Amulet Titan, and I think Reclaimer is just like the Ladamri's Toolbox version is a little bit better, you'd rather... If you're given the choice, you'd rather go with the Ladamri's Toolbox. Yeah.
So if I were to play in a modern event right now, I would register Green Reclaimer simply just because I value the more flexibility that the deck has in comparison to the explosiveness and speed that Amulet does. So yeah, that's where I personally lie at when it comes to those 2 decks. At one point, I was trying to play both of them. For a while, I was trying out Reclaimer Amulet. I was trying to tune it for a super that week, and the one issue that I found with the deck. So the one benefit about the deck is that not only you're still like fast like Amulet, you do lose a little bit because you're playing things like Reclaimer, but when having a Reclaimer in a deck like Amulet, you're providing Amulet with extra flexibility game 1, while also having that more explosiveness and in Amulet. Now, the one issue with that variant of Amulet, though, the mana base, Amulet historically has probably the worst mana base in Modern, and it does not get any better with Reclaimer. Even with having this Flagstones package, you're forcing yourself to play 3-4 copies of Flagstones, 2-3 copies of Temple Garden. Like you're forcing yourself to play all these lands that you otherwise would not want to be playing in Amulet, and so you're forced to make a lot of sacrifices. And just a lot of the time, it really skews your mana, and it just does not work out a lot of time. So that was one issue I had with registering the deck, and ultimately is why I didn't, because that issue within Reclaimer Amulet, I don't think is worth fixing, and I don't think it is fixable.
Yeah. Just to add to sort of the Reclaimer or Amulet Titan debate, I think both decks are tremendously good choices right now in the metagame. A lot of people are super down on Amulet. I think that they haven't, in my opinion, I don't think it's been explored enough. The shell hasn't been explored enough. And that was sort of the mantra that I got as I got started on Twitter and on Modo this quarantine during isolation. I got like the Mad Hatter quality of trying to tune Titan decks and playing some weird cards to try and combat the metagame. And I think that helped me a lot into seeing what works and what doesn't, and what are your heuristics and game plans against certain decks. I do think getting to a point where you can very easily navigate some matchups because you've tried them and you know exactly what the axis of attack is, I think favors playing the faster deck that actually has better sideboard tools than necessarily the slower, more consistent deck. So, and it also leads to less lopsided matchups. So say, obviously Reclaimer is slightly better in the 60 versus Blood Moon and Aethergust decks. However, in the matchups where Amulet is favored, I get the feeling, and from testing both decks a lot, I get the feeling that Amulet is much more favored in the underdog matchups of Reclaimer. So for example, a matchup like Tron is extremely difficult in game 1, and even game 2s and 3s, the way green-white Reclaimer is built, because it lacks speed. Also, the Taxes matchup becomes considerably harder because your Mana Dork requires you to search your library, right? Which Leonin Arbiter just stops. So your plan of getting the twin situation of turn 1 Forest Reclaimer, turn 2 Flagstones is invalidated by their 2/2. And you literally depend on Reclaimer to get to the mana advantage, apart from cards like Explorer. So you get to have a more balanced meta. So you get to play closer to a 50-50 against a lot of decks. And the matchups where Amulet is favored, you end up actually being unfavored due to your speed. If you feel like you're comfortable enough with both decks, I wouldn't see a scenario other than I want to preserve my brain cells as much as possible, and I want to play slow games where I know I'm going to get a Titan. I think you should pick Reclaimer if that's the case. I think if you are interested and you know the meta well enough that you actually know what threats exist to your game plan and what to attack, sort of chirurgically. Sorry for the English. If you get to actually hit the nail on the head on the metagame, I think Amulet is a far better choice because of speed and because of the value that the sideboard cards give you for the most part.
You know, I mean, this is just a classic thing I keep talking about is like, if you want to compete with the metagame, you have to keep adapting the deck as the metagame changes. Yeah. And obviously you're the one who says, hey, Amulet's fine, because you're the one doing the adaptation. You said, I'm going all in on 4 Dismember. I'm going all in on 4 Tireless Tracker. And I have a plan to beat these decks that normally would be bad matchups. I mean, if you don't change your deck, then you are going to go away with the times. I do understand, however, the pressure people have. They now have 2 choices. And one deck does look easier to play than the other one. Going to be much more approachable for a lot of people picking up either Titan deck. Oh, it's really too bad we don't have Fran here, because I got the impression from Twitter, and maybe you guys could help give his perspective. I mean, he just said it's unplayable. It's just like this is just straight up unplayable. None of these matchups are good. They're unwinnable. So forget about it. Can anyone maybe get help? Maybe because through your talking and your DMs, what is his perspective of Amulet in the metagame right now?
Fran, essentially, like both myself and him really share the same opinion when it comes to Amulet in the metagame. A lot of what I've been trying to say has been really a lot of it has been what's the word here? Like retelling what Fran has been saying. He talked about it a bit when we were recording the podcast. Like he said it quite a bit on the podcast last episode, I believe. And we talked about it again last week when we were recording, but unfortunately, again, not released. But so a lot of the things that I'm saying about the deck is what Fran has been saying about the deck.
Yeah. I do. I've talked a bit to Fran about it, and I'm definitely in the minority in the podcast, as you can tell.
Someone's got to represent their archetype.
No, exactly. And
rain or snow, we're gonna play Amulets.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I'm kind of increasing my range, and I do enjoy the play patterns in green-white gives, and I've played a lot of green-white Reclaimer too. It's not necessarily like you said, a rain or snow. I'll play Amulet. I cannot convince myself that Reclaimer is better than Amulet if you get to know the metagame and how to attack it. So Fran's opinion is more of there is this deck that I personally prefer playing right now, and I think it has less lopsided matchups, which is completely fair and one of the best reasons I'd say for you to choose a deck. But you can fight those lopsided matchups well enough with Amulet that I think, for the most part, some people just prefer the play style of Reclaimer to the point that it might just be a better choice. I think it's very well represented in the meta because of mostly two amazing players that we've got to know. X-Whale, who went to the podcast after he won the showcase. won the showcase, and Soulstrong, Adriano Sol, who's a Brazilian grinder. Both of them have been tearing house completely with Reclaimer. The thing is, there aren't a lot of Amulet. So the big Amulet players that have been on tournaments just haven't, either they've transitioned to green white Reclaimer, or they just haven't been playing. For example, Punt and Wine stopped playing for a while. Only played a showcase qualifier that he just snap 5-0'd because Amulet is still good.
Yeah, it's still good.
To be fair, Amulet, Punt can, when it comes to Punt, like he can win with literally any pile of cards in Amulet. Like I think anyone can. The list that Punt and Wine registered in that last chance qualifier was actually a test list that he was playing. That was playing 4 copies of Crumbling Message, which is not something you see in Amulet, and is not something you should see in Amulet. But again, he was just trying it out, and of course he qualified for the event with it. I believe Punt actually got 11th in the mock showcase with Amulet.
His opinion of Amulet actually mirrors mine. He says, I don't understand why people are saying it's unplayable. I think, and our lists are totally different. He's playing Karns, he's playing a completely different mana base, different haste land, different mana dorks. I'm playing polar opposite, I'd say. And we're both finding some successes with the list because we're both attacking the meta in slightly different ways. Karn is a much more disruptive card against the combo decks, right? So the combo decks get marginally better, get surprisingly better, because you get access to Oops All Spells is not a problem when you play Karn into Tormod's Crypt. They cannot win game 1. While Amulet loses a lot to Oops All Spells, so you get to devote sideboard slots to it. The way both decks are built, they're built to attack the meta while having some reservations on the best and worst matchups of each version. For example, I'd say Oops All Spells and Ad Nauseam is a horrible matchup for the Amulet version. the Amulet non-Karn version. While Karn versus Ad Nauseam is almost an auto-win. He cannot lose even if he wants to against Ad Nauseam. And he loses a bit more percentage points against like the Shadow decks. And even against the Shadow decks, you get Karn, which is a threat that goes over Blood Moon and under Gust. See what I mean? Like you can adapt your lists to now a much shorter number of cards. So if Blood Moon and Gust is the problem, it's much better than a random assortment of 7 different cards that you actually have to play around every single time. And we've noticed that as modern decks have narrowed down, and the answers that are played are very low in variety. For example, if you want to beat the Uro decks, Boil is going to be like your number 1 answer, if you can. If not, Relic. And then what is the third one? Most people just don't go to the third one because having those 2 is good enough, right? So people aren't playing Ashiok anymore, which is a much more worrisome card, in my opinion, than, say, Blood Moon. And it works in an axis that is much more difficult to deal with. So if you actually know what's coming, you can build your Amulet deck to actually fight any opponent, I'd say. I had that scenario come up with Doomwake. Devin O'Donnell, he's a huge streamer in the quarantine. He was deciding. Yeah, shout out to Doomwake. He was deciding on what deck to play for the mocks, and he actually he asked me, "What do you think Amulet is like?" These are the decks that I'm expecting. How is Amulet there? And I said, well, if you're only expecting 23 lists and you have some idea, I think Amulet might be one of the best decks possible, because you know exactly what hate you're going to get faced. So that helps Amulet immensely. And I think I noticed someone in chat saying, like, what about the humans matchup and, say, cards like Meddling Mage?
Yeah, you ready for some Q&A? Well, I mean, this is a Q&A show. This is where the people get to interact live. It's not your usual... So, yeah, Dan W. says, how does it do against humans with Meddling Mage?
I don't mind starting here, actually. Way easier than before. The introduction of Dryad means that you have a removal spell in your deck. So if you get to find a Valakut before you land the Titan, you're actually able to deal and shotgun their board easily enough that you're actually able to leverage Primeval Titan. Not just that, a small card actually changes the matchup significantly versus a humans deck, which is Turn Timber Symbiosis. That card can be a Titan that does not get caught with Meddling Mage. So if you cast a Turn Timber Symbiosis and you actually flip a Titan, it still enters the battlefield. It still triggers because it's not cast.
A Titan.
Yep.
That's right.
It's still a Titan.
Still cheat. So actually now you could cheat. Well, I already knew the Valakut plan because I get my own board annihilated no matter what. How do you beat 4 5/5 lords in play? Oh, we just Valakut them all to death.
Yep.
Yeah, and Turn Timber Symbiosis also another way now to get through the Meddling Mage.
Yeah, Turn Timber was a massive upgrade for Amulet, and it's definitely I think is the second best thing that Amulet has gotten all year. Of course, number 1 being Dryad. Having a card that gives functionally gives you more turn 1 untapped resources, albeit not forest, which is important for castle, but having turn 1 untapped resource, even the cost of 3 life, worth it, and as well as later on in the game, when you're just doing absolutely nothing. And then, of course, here's a bounce land. I'm not doing anything anyway. I'll play a bounce land. I'll pick up my Turn Timber, pay 7 mana. If I hit a Titan, sweet, I won the game. If I hit like a Dryad, or sometimes, hell, you hit a Grazer, and then you get a 3/6 Grazer with Reach, you still have you've still put something in play that you don't actually have something in play. Whereas even if you brick and you just have 0 creatures in the top 7, I was doing nothing with my turn anyway, and now I've done nothing with my turn afterwards. It really is just like Turn Timber is basically given Amulet a last resort card that was, I think, it may not have been desperately needed, but it was definitely something that Amulet was interested in having.
Something to spend all their mana on anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what do you guys think? Is there any room for Uro in some Titan lists?
I can answer this one. So when Uro got printed, it was one of the cards that the Amulet community was thinking, is this a card that we can play? And it was tested back when in the long days of paper Magic, back when that existed. I believe Matt Dilks might have, or Will Pulliam did. I don't remember who did, but I think they were trying it out. I know in more recent days, Mistaken, Spanish Amulet player, very, very good player. He was very, very high on Uro, and it's the one. So Uro effectively is just a fifth copy of Explorer that can sometimes come back in the late game as a 6/6. The issue with Uro in Amulet in particular is the fact that it is ridiculously hard to escape. You were having to, like, Amulet does not fill up its grave very easily. You're playing things like Explorer, which sure that cantrips, but you're only playing like 3 or 4 copies of that. You're playing at most 1, sometimes 2 fetch lands in your deck, sometimes even 0. So at that point, it becomes ridiculously hard to escape Uro. Which at that point you would rather just have. If you're playing like 3 Explorer, 1 Uro, you might as well be playing the 4th Explorer.
Oh, why not maybe say a Bant Reclaimer deck?
Yeah. Ooh. So actually, in my on my Goldfish page, there's actually a list from Bullwinkle. I don't know, 1706, I think. But he was trying that out. So this was when Canister was trying out the blue-green Uro Titan deck with Cryptic Command remands, all that jazz. And I think if you're going to be playing Uro in a Titan deck, that is the shell to be doing it in, because you're playing a million fetch lands, you're playing cards like Growth Spiral, you're playing cheap interaction cards like Remand Mana Leak. So
but now we're just a control deck playing with
exactly, right? Like you're
Titan.
You're a control deck that has 4 copies of Titan, 4 copies of Uro. Like that is just like that. Like that's the type of shell that it's basically just here's 2020 in a nutshell. And there you go. But yeah, so
and a banned commander card.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right? It still baffles me that card's banned commander. Yeah. So. But when that deck was coming around, Bullwinkle, he tried the deck and he wondered, well, what if I just throw the Reclaimer package in there? And so they took the Blue-Green Titan deck, put 4 copies of Elvish Reclaimer, 4 copies of Flaxlands of Trocaire, some white lands in there, and played League 5 out of it. I was like, well, this looks cool. I'll try it out. I then proceeded to go 10-0 with the deck. I was like, huh, cool. So it is something that you can do. But from after playing the deck more, again, the biggest issue with the deck is mana base. It's really, really bad. And also, Elvish Reclaimer plus Growth Spiral, those two contradict each other a lot, because you want to be able to go turn to activate Reclaimer, but you also want to go turn to Growth Spiral, right? And you're also like, well, for green and blue in a deck that where the mana base is really bad, like, it's the same reason why Amulet doesn't play Growth Spiral, is because it's a lot easier to cast a card that's green 1 than green blue. So yeah. But yeah, so Uro, but just like wrap it up. In a deck like Amulet, you can play it. It's really up to you, but a lot of time it's just going to be a 5th copy of Explorer.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, this is probably a very popular question. Do you guys objectively think anything from Titan should be banned?
Yes.
So what is that card? Or
Feel
what
the
card?
Dead.
Feel the Dead. 100%.
Oh, you think okay, so you're all against Feel the Dead, with the guy to dump this damn thing.
Yes. This card needs to be banned. And like the play patterns that this card creates, like we're not even the best Feel the Dead deck. That's 4-color on math. That deck is taking advantage of Feel the Dead more than we are. And but no, like this card is absolutely absurd. It is very hard to interact with it. It's why Blood Moon is so well positioned in the meta, because, of course, this card doesn't do anything against the Blood Moon. And so, but just the fact that you are not only making every single draw in your deck worth it, like you're making your lands good draws, you're making your spells good draws, of course. Like being and like fetch lands being so like a fetch land equaling 2-4 power, like it's just the play patterns that this card creates in Modern is absolutely absurd, and the fact that it has lasted this long in the format is absolutely ridiculous to me. If this card does get banned, though, when it comes to Amulet, because I've said this on the podcast around 2 months ago, I said within the next 6 months, Field of Dead and Mystic Sanctuary are going to be banned, and I still stand by this, and I still think that I'm correct. Now, the one thing about it though is, if Field Deck gets banned, here's what happens with Amulet: the control matchup suffers immensely because you are like Field Deck was one of the game plans that allowed Amulet to have a lot more game plan against control. Because once Field Deck gets banned, they're still going to have Aether Gust. So a lot of the time, you are now going to be reliant on Resolving Titan plus Resolving Dryad. Whereas with Field Dead, Resolving Titan will win the game, but now a lot of the time you're now asking yourself to resolve 2 threats in order to close the game, which can be a lot more difficult to do. So when this card does get banned, the control matchup's going to suffer. The mid-range matchups might get a little worse. What I'm thinking is we end up going back to playing Colony Garden just as a way to generate more bodies, and maybe a third copy of Tolaria West. But yeah, I'm not too sure what will happen with that, but that's what I'm thinking with
This card dominates any slow matchup. For example, one thing that I've tried out a lot in the past with my lists, I've shaven the number of Dryads down to 3 because I don't think Valakut's win condition is good enough right now, since Field of the Dead is so much better in almost any other way. Against the Omnath decks, if I don't see an Ashiok, for example, I cut all the Dryads and the Valakut from the deck to bring in trackers and ways to maximize Field of the Dead. Because Valakut is just not good enough compared to Field. The amount of people that are saying that Dryad is a very problematic card because it gives you a way of interacting in the main deck. Just Field of the Dead is the definition of uninteractable. You cannot, in a good way, deal with Field for the most part. So it makes some control matchups, and any non-Uro control deck, like Blue Eye Control, the matchup is laughably bad for them because we have access to Field. It is such a noxious card to deal with and to play with. As a person that has probably killed hundreds of opponents on Moto with 2/2 zombies, I'm one of the first proponents of wanting this card banned. I don't think what it does is fair or balanced in the metagame right now.
It's funny, it didn't look like much, you know? It looked like a worse Valakut, but in the end it ends up just being a much better Valakut because it can block.
Yeah, I distinctly remember trying it out in paper, and I said, I'm gonna play 1 in the sideboard in case I play against a slower deck, because I want to try it out. That 1 in the sideboard got to 1 in the main board real quick, and 1 in the main board got not enough. So I was playing 1 in the main board and 1 in the sideboard. Then I went into 2 in the main board because the card is amazing. Now I'm just happy enough with 1 Field of the Dead. I think it's enough, but it's probably one of the strongest cards right now. Yes, not even close.
We got like a bit of a question. Why Colony Garden and not Dwarven Mine?
Well, there's one big thing about this. Dwarven Mine requires you to have. I don't actually. I need to just.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Sure.
So, so when Dwarven Mine enters the battlefield untapped, create a 1/1 dwarf. And after tapped, unless you control 3 more mountains. Well, with Primeval Titan, when you're getting lands off Primeval Titan, those lands are tapped, so you will never ever get a dwarf off of it. And also, your deck does not play mountains, and your decks and your lands are not going to be mountains unless you have a Dryad in play. So, I would much rather have a card like Colony Garden that says, "Okay, here's a body, and maybe an 0/1, and may die to Lava Dart, and may die to Red and 6, but it's still a body." And I would
much green.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
And guaranteed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Tapping for green is what Amulet wants, and if the land taps for green, it's gonna be good in Amulet. So that was what. And so back when Amulet did play Colony Garden, this was back when Jund was a more reasonable deck to play. So I remember I saw someone in chat saying that feel that it killed Jund. This person is not wrong. Feel that it just created it creates so much power so quickly that it made Jund so much worse of a deck. And Colony Garden was one of the things that gave Amulet some protection against Jund, because if you resolve a Titan and you don't have something like Field, they're able to go Lily Edict you, and you just don't have a Titan play. So before Field like I printed, you would play Colony Garden in your deck, and you would get Colony Garden off your Titan. So that way you were making a body in addition to your Titan. So that way you had something to sack to that. So yeah.
Also, Colony Garden is probably the best Radiant Fountain this deck has ever seen. In that Jund, no, it really is. Back when Jund was in the tiers, Grixis Death Shadow was also a really popular deck. I cannot tell you how many times I've put a stupid plant in front of a Gurmag Angler. Too many times.
5 life.
I think lifetime I've played with Radiant Fountain much more than Colony Garden, and I think lifetime Colony Garden has saved me from more life, for example. I think it's not even particularly close.
True story. I believe it.
Yeah.
How much time do you guys have?
I'm free.
How about you, Jack?
Ooh. Jack is frozen.
Cutting in and out. If you have any questions for our guests about Titan-related topics, you can always go 3 question marks before the question, 3 question marks after the question. That helps me find your questions from all the comments. Also, we could probably do deck list review today, but please make it Titan decks. So if you, when we get to the point, if anyone has a Titan deck available for our special guests who are specialists in Titan, you'll have to get really, really good feedback. We'll do a deck list review. We'll try to do deck list review if anyone has any Titan decks available, and I will basically hand pick from them. It won't be so random today.
I'm super down.
How many times has he killed Death Shadow players with a plant token?
Okay. Plant token is a very underrated win condition in Amulet. Not just by getting yourself out of edicts from Liliana. There were a lot of times as Amulet evolved and the meta surrounding it evolved that made it so, for example, a card like Colony Garden, for the token to have a bit more of a representation than just a 0/1. So, for example, when Lantern was a deck, actually a plant token was the main win condition, because you could just attack with it under an ensnaring bridge and just give it +2/+0 and double strike with Slayer Stronghold and Sunhome. Like you get to randomly kill some players with the axes and the availability of having the Slayer Stronghold and, say, a token generator or a cheap creature. It's not uncommon. Back in the days before Dryad, before Once Upon a Time, before all of these things, the original versions of Amulet, Sakura Tribe Scout was just an amazing top deck to have against control, because it represented a 3/1 that would just attack, right? It's 3/1 with haste that they have to deal with. They have to spend resources. And Colony Garden and Slayer Stronghold are sort of best buddies in the sense that when they actually come up, it's very brutal. Most people just aren't expecting it. And I remember a lot of matchups where Colony Garden's 0 power was actually relevant, like against a Snaring Bridge. It gives you an out in a way. It's definitely I think most Amulet players that consider themselves like sort of experienced with the deck have killed someone with Colony Garden. I definitely say that.
Of course.
I unfortunately can say I have not, because I started playing Amulet after Field that I got printed, so I never really got the chance to experiment with Colony Garden. But hopefully the chart gets banned so I can do so.
If not asked, what cards are best against Titan, and this is interesting because you thought Ashiok was more dangerous to you than Blood Moon.
Yeah.
And that's not the opinion I got from Fran that I interviewed like a year ago on this topic. So I'd love to hear about this.
So
I think the best cards.
Yeah, go for it, Jack.
Okay, yeah. So I will agree with say here. I do think Ashiok is more of a problematic card against Amulet, simply because Amulet has an easier time of dealing with things like Blood Moon in Breast Sage, Force of Vigor, whereas we don't have things like that. For a while, we were playing Beast Within, which was a catch-all for literally every problematic answer in the format for Amulet, right? And Beast Within was, of course, the number one way for us to answer an Ashiok. But even then, but right now, you see a lot of us cutting Beast Within. And so a lot of the time we've become more reliant on our creatures like Tireless Tracker, Dryad Beats, Feel the Dead Zombies, like or Dryad allowing Valka to ping down a Ashiok. So a lot of time it's a lot.
Oh, a house went down. Just to compliment what he was saying, I think it's much more difficult to positively engage with an Ashiok because your game plan revolves around Summoner's Pacting for a Primeval Titan. And Ashiok absolutely laughs in the face of Summoner's Pact, while Blood Moon is actually deltable, and it has the beauty of being deltable now more than ever without having to require mana with Force of Vigor in a spot where they don't get to have a response. So that's what I'd say makes Blood Moon I'd say easier to deal with than Ashiok. I was just complimenting what you were saying, Jack, when you went down.
Yeah, my internet's not being kind to me right now.
Nah, it's okay.
If Ashiok's number one, is Blood Moon number two?
I think ironically, I think there are a lot of good cards against Amulet that just aren't used right now. I think Confounding Conundrum is one of the scariest cards that I can face.
Yeah.
By far, not.
Someone actually was asking about that earlier.
Yeah, it's one of the scariest.
Barely seeing play.
Yeah. So when Zendikar spoiler season was around, we covered this card on the day it got spoiled, and all of us on the podcast were freaking out. We're freaking out about this card just because it is so ridiculously hard for Amulet to play around this card. I remember playing. I was at an FNM and one of my opponents cast this against me, and I had my head in my hands trying to figure out how am I supposed to play around this card, because they're playing this main deck, I believe, as well. So it was like unless you have an Amulet, I don't understand how you're supposed to play around this card. And so and a lot of times it makes it so awkward because if you have a pack, so you have to make sure you have a pack to pay for, but you're bouncing all these lands, and it's such a hard card for Amulet to interact with, and it is kind of a starter that the card doesn't see more play. Like the only deck in Modern that I've seen utilize this card is the blue-white Yorion Taxi deck. That is the only deck I've seen use this card.
Yeah, me
also,
too.
Shout out to my boy Tunnel Ignis. If you're an Amulet player and you face the Tunnel Ignis, you know it's gonna hurt. You know it's gonna be a cool match.
Oh yeah,
at least Tunnel Ignis.
Tunnel Ignis is a very, very interesting card for Amulet to play.
I've never heard of this. Okay, we got a red and 1. It's a 2/1 creature. It's an elemental though, so you could see this in 5-color elementals. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player had another land enter the battlefield under their control this turn, it deals 3 damage to that player. Woo!
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's a cool one. My Titans are always Colossal Dreadmaw against that. Always. Yep. It's not even close. I will not get 2 lands, thank you.
Yeah, it is.
Fail to find.
Yeah, there are some cards there's some cards in Modern that are definitely underutilized against Amulet. One card in particular though that is recently seen more play is Blood Sun. I know Aspiring Spike has been playing with that Jeskai Lotus Field control deck. Blood Sun, honestly, I would rather play against Blood Moon than Blood Sun because, like, sure, your land's still tap for what they wanted to tap for, but they don't do anything. Your bounce lands are now 2-color soul lands, which you'd think 2-color soul lands, awesome, but it's like they're not bounce lands, and a lot of time you want to have that bounce effect because if you have the Solera Bus in play, you won't be able to transmute it. Well, I can play a bounce land, but I can't bounce my Solera Bus to transmute it to get an answer to this Blood Sun. So it is a really problematic card, and so I actually remember I was playing in the Super a few weeks ago, and round 1, and this is before Spike brewed the deck. And round 1, I got paired against a Jeskai control deck with Blood Sun in it, and I just was at a loss for words playing against this deck. It was the weirdest experience I've ever had in an event like a PTQ. And honestly, this card is just, and I want to say I'm happy it's seen more play, but really I'm not, because this card is just so absurd. And the fact that it's been this long. Like it's been printed and it's been out for 2 years, and it's only now starting to see some play in the format. So
yeah,
interesting. So any other like we're learning about cards that are really good to get Titan that no one uses, so they just don't see any play. People think Damping Spear. They think that
Torpor Orb is definitely a very good answer to Titan decks as well. Not
I guess
only
the problem is a lot of other decks would get killed by Torpor Orb.
That is true, but
Torpor Orb has a lot of.
It's particularly an elegant solution because almost all Titan decks have a Reclamation Sage in their 75, and Reclamation Sage not being able to deal with Torpor Orb is kind of a weird scenario. But
yeah,
the Reclaimer decks, they can't Skyclave Apparition this thing.
They can.
You are forced to having an explosives or a force in order to answer the Torpor Orb, or there be lots of, or this has come up where. They have a Torpor Orb, but I just naturally have the haste land, so I'm able to play my Titan. I don't get the ETB, but I'm able to haste it immediately and attack and get the trigger. So it's not one of the greatest cards against Amulet, but it definitely does a lot. It definitely puts in a lot of work. I will say though, one of the most overrated cards against Amulet is Damping Sphere. And
overrated.
With the printing of Dryad, it has become a lot worse. Before Dryad, it was a lot easier because it was something a little bit better because with Dryad, you're making all of your lands tap rainbow, right? But with Damping Sphere, before Dryad, your bounce lands were just tapping for colorless. So it was but now with Dryad, it's a lot easier to transmute for an answer, and it's a lot easier to catch your Titan through having having your bounce lands being able to tap for colored sources. So so it is a card that can work, and it does make things a little bit trickier where we'll have to cast a Pact and then pay 7 for a Titan, which maybe sometimes the math won't add up for us. And if you're able to land a Damping Sphere, of course, after we paid for a Pact and we no play around it, well then of course you got to cheese us. It is a card that can work, and if you have them, you should bring them in. But
it used to work, but today it's not nearly as effective.
Yes. So
and just to add to what Jack was saying, not just because of that, but because of also a small evolution that happened in the Titan lists was steering away from the Boros Garrison Slayer Stronghold haste package, and now playing Handward Battlements, mostly because with the adaptation of Dryad, we wanted a cleaner mana base, so Handward Battlement serves better as a haste land, because it also allows you to get Valakut, so you can haste it. Right. And ironically, Damping Sphere does nothing against the hate package, because the Valakut will naturally tap for red, while before, our haste engine used red and white at the same time, which Damping Sphere invalidated completely. And now, not really. If you are able to land a Titan with a Damping Sphere on the board, you're always going to be able to haste it too.
Yeah.
And at that point, Damping Sphere did close to nothing.
So here's an interesting question. Elysian Grove versus Prismatic Omen, which Prismatic Omen was in the format for forever.
Yeah. The main difference is being able to... There are 3 big differences. I'd say 2 big differences. The first one is being a green creature. So that means that it is pact worthy. So you can Summoner's Pact for it whenever you need it.
Tutor for this, yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge difference. The other big difference is the additional land on each of your turns. So the nature of Amulet Titan as a deck is to being able to leverage the natural card advantage that you already have with bounce lands in your deck, being able to leverage that card advantage into mana advantage. So you use Amulet of Vigor to maximize the possibilities of those bounce lands, generating 2 mana the turn they come into play. With Dryad, you actually get, with Dryad, Explorer, Azusa, extra land drop effects, you get to maximize the amount of mana you generate up until 6, which is the magic number, right? So if that's the case, we are very much in the market for a creature that is green, that gives you extra land drops, and it actually gives you not only the secondary win con of Valakut, but also gives you a small Blood Moon protection, meaning that if the opponent has a Blood Moon and you play a Dryad over the Blood Moon, all of your lands will be all of your non-basic lands will be mountains, but they all tap for mana of any color.
But we still get that advantage with Prismatic Omen, no?
Yeah, it's the same advantage, but you get a 2/4 body and a creature and the Explorer effect.
Yeah, and you packed for it.
Yeah.
Are there any good companion options for the Titan decks?
I've tried.
Who's gone down this rabbit hole?
I've tried. The thing is, if you think about the biggest ones, most of them are just invalidated, right? Because you can't play Obosh and you can't play Garuda, because the deck is called Amulet, which costs 1, and Titan, which costs 6. So those two, out of the question. Lurrus, out of the question. You need Titan. Gigantha, out of the question. Titan is green. So all of a sudden, we're clearing 4 of them. So Yorion is the one that I've tried, and I think it's fine. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's meta breaking, because it actually harms the concept of the deck, right? You want your deck to be as streamlined as possible because you want to find Primeval Titan. Other than Summoner's Pact, there isn't a 9th copy of Primeval Titan. Golos tries to be, but it's not close. Hour of Promise tries to be, but it's not close as well. So you want to maximize the number of Titans that you see. Yorion doesn't allow that, just on the principle of its deck building restriction. The same can be said for Lutri. Lutri cannot function in a deck that actively wants to see a card. So there aren't any good companion options. Also, Karuga is invalidated because you need Amulet. So a lot of them, due to Amulet of Vigor and Primeval Titan, you get to eliminate like 7 companions that you can play.
Yeah.
So sadly, there isn't a good option for a companion in Amulet.
I will say 2 things. One, well, you say Garuda is not entirely an option. Well, not for Amulet, but there is that one Jund Garuda Titan deck that sometimes comes on, and you'll see it in the 5/0 dumps. Like you're basically just like playing things like Farseek and Muvali Acid Moss. So you're rem yourself, and then you cast Garuda. You milk top of card your deck, and you have all these haymakers like I believe Sire of Insanity, and of course Primeval Titan in there. Where you don't get the benefit of having Dry in your deck, so you can't shoot them with Valakuts, but you still get Field Edge. So again, Field Edge makes it so you can play things like this. It's not a particularly good deck, but it is something that you can do. And the second thing was weren't you for a while experimenting with some Yumori Titan deck for a while?
Yeah, I tried on Yumori, but it was before the companion nerf, and it wasn't an Amulet list because, again, Umori only allows you to have one certain type of card. I was playing a creature toolbox deck with Fiend Artisan and Umori as companion, and I think I got a string of 2 trophies in a row with the deck. The deck felt amazing at the time. You can still find it on my Goldfish page, but sadly it's died. I think the upside of having Umori as a companion made it so you could turn to Sakura Tribes Elder turn 3 Mori, turn 4 Titan. That was a very real possibility that happened.
Yeah.
And having the Mori as a companion allowed that. Now, not so much. So you could make it work in a sort of Titan Reclaimer list. I just don't think it's good enough right now. No.
Okay, so some people are wondering, how do we submit Titan deck lists? So I'll tell you how you do it. There is going to be a link to my Discord in the description below. And from that Discord, go to Decklist Review, the channel Decklist Review. From there, please use the command !review deck, space, give the URL to your deck list, and then space, just use the word Titan. So I know it's a Titan deck, and I will hand pick some of them for our guests, because they are Titan experts, and we'll get some nice. We have a Titantron deck. I
love
saw
it
briefly. You'll love it. Well, we'll look at one of them.
I'm much more patient and understanding than Jack is when it comes to lists, because I get to innovate considerably more.
So on the podcast, Jose is our resident madman. On multiple occasions, I have called Jose clinically insane for some of the things that he does with Titan decks, and he has done, like, you have done some weird things with him. Like I know, like a little while ago, you donated to Doomwake to play the Wargate.
Wargate.
Yep,
Wargate is a staple in my collection. Yeah, I always try to make that work.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the beauty of delving into a deck, right? I think Nikachu can speak for that. Like, how even with a simple shell that you would say, for example, Merfolk has, you can innovate tremendously on it. You have so much unexplored ground, and I think maybe it's running low now. Maybe it's running low now because you've done so much tutoring and kind of innovating with it. I have
some bad matchups now. I gotta shore up. There's some. I used to smile when I saw a Death Shadow matchup. Now I'm super unhappy when I see Death Shadow.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to do about this matchup anymore. I'm just like, I just hope I don't play against it when I see a Death Shadow. Turn 1 Swiss Spear into turn 2 shot, like Scourge of the Skyclaves. Okay, we can just concede this match. Move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have a lot more questions still.
Sure.
How many cards have the Titan decks got over the course of the last 2 years? Can we even count that high? But like, what would you say?
Yeah. Okay, so we have
many.
Okay, so going back in timeline since today. So Turn Timber, Dryad, Field of Dead. What else did we get? Let me pull up a deck list really quick because I have Moto open.
Why am I doing this? I have everything here.
Right. Yeah. So we have Castle Garenbrig as well. That was a big addition for the deck. So there was that from Eldraine. Oko was played and named it for a little bit when that was legal. Once Upon a Time, of course.
Amulet banned cards.
Yeah, Amulet was part of the reason once got banned. So there's that.
I would say it's the main reason it got banned.
That's fair. So we have so the 2 banned cards, we have Turn Timber, Field, Castle, Dryad, and I think that's it.
If you want to go like the narrower route, you also have Grazer, you have Golos if you've tried it in the deck. You have Uro again if you are enabling Uro in your lists.
You have Valakut now. This is not a new card.
Yeah,
thanks to Dryad of the Elysian Grove, it is a new card, and I think it single-handedly killed the Titan Shift deck because that's a dead deck now. I 2 years ago there was
cards. I love when we find cards for our deck that are only relevant now, even though they've always existed. I remember a year and a half ago, people were tinkering with Trinket Mage in the main deck, so it could find Amulet of Vigor and Ballista and Explosives, and that card has been out since Mirrodin, right? So it's most definitely a recent addition, but not necessarily like a recent one in time. Force of Vigor too. Force of Vigor is the big one.
Yeah, Force is the big one.
If you compare this deck list to something like 5 years ago, it's unrecognizable.
Yeah, for example, Boil. Boil is a 2020 card, right? People were not playing Boil before 2019. Like, it is a card that got released in the last 2 years.
How much do you want to play around Boil?
I never play around Boil.
Me
I
neither.
think.
Interesting.
I think.
Please
I
stop
think
bringing in Boil against Amulet. Please stop. You're really hurting your game plan. The only deck, and I think Fran would agree with me on this. The only deck that it is acceptable to bring in Boil is Jund. That is the only deck I will say it is acceptable. If you're playing Grow mid range, please stop doing that. Your deck is already favored against Amulet. Like, you're playing Blood Moon, you're playing one of the best cards ever printed together, Amulet. Like, you're favored. Stop doing that. With the Blu-ray Kiki deck, with the Boil Banner base, again, you're a control deck that has an I win button. Stop doing that.
Okay.
So yeah, it's like Boil is a card that you can bring in, and there is situations where you can cheese us, but it's a card that also a lot of the time can just be a dead card in your hand. It'll be like, I know, like, some people have given me the argument. I know Chris Giglio or Gigi, the Groupons like master.
Yeah.
His argument for bringing Boil against Amulet or Titan X in general is just because you just have not enough cards to bring out, or no, you don't have enough cards to bring in. Like, you have cards like Skews, like cards like Clothis that, of course, you don't want against Amulet, and so he's bringing Boil in space of that, which I can see that argument, but to me, it does not seem worth it. And if anything, unless the matchup is horrendous for you, I don't like. If you are favored, don't bring it in. But if you think you are questionably unfavored, then maybe you can consider bringing it in.
So it's like a high variance card that's probably not even plus EV, but like it's your last resort for anyone who has a terrible matchup for Amulet.
In a lot of matchups, and I diverge heavily from my two co-hosts when it comes to that. I take out Dryad very liberally in a lot of matchups, even if they don't have Boil. Like, currently, I'm playing 3 in the main, and most game 2s and 3s, I'm only presenting 2, for example, because I think the deck can work over it, right? It doesn't necessarily need the Dryad Valakut win condition, right?
So your only way of losing is if they cheese you out with Boil, is what way you're looking at it.
Which, for example, against a deck with Ponza, it's not maneuverable, right? You need the Dryads in your deck to have a fighting chance.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of matchups, and even the ones when you're expecting Boil, when you can just easily cut the Dryads. If I was playing against Jund, I would cut all the Dryads and the Valakut from my deck. Just because because 1, they don't do enough. 2, you're already bringing in trackers and relics. So you actually have more room to bring those cards in, which are more high impact. And 3, you get them with an empty piece of cardboard. So it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Through the Breach, keep or weep. Have you played any of these versions?
Yeah. So again, I mentioned before, Mistaken, Spanish anime player. He's been experimenting with.
Look, they put Emrakul in the image. I can't believe it.
Yeah. Mistaken has been trying out a list with Through the Breach, of course, with Emrakul, and then in the board you have things like Terastodon, Woodfall Primus, Hornet Queen, a bunch of different things like that. So it is something that you can do. I think it's a reason. I think it is reasonable in a meta full of Blood Moons, since it is one of your best ways to answer a Blood Moon. So I do think that this card is acceptable to do right now, but it's something questionable, right? Because with Force Negation, the card being a card that exists, it's a little more. It makes it a little more hesitant to play this card in Amulet, but I don't know. I personally am not the biggest fan of it, but it is something you can do.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting and a good way to attack a certain meta. So yeah, it's a keep.
Came in late. How does Amulet Titan handle the Hammer Time deck? Break him the
Scoop
bad
game
news.
1. Scoop game 1. Bring in Dismember, Force of Vigors, Reclamation Sages, Path to Exiles if you're splashing it. Game 2s and 3s, and that should be enough.
Yep. I agree there. Yeah. Game one, unless they keep a really slow hand and you have turn 2 or turn 3 Titan, you're not winning.
Yeah. It's a really rough one, man. It's a really rough matchup.
So you're just how unfair? Is it even? Are you just saying it's unfavorable because you're just dumping game 1 so often?
It is unfavorable.
Okay.
And,
I think it's perfectly winnable. I think it's perfectly manageable. You have to have a sideboard tool for it.
Yeah, I agree. It is. When I think about this deck, I think about it a lot. I think about it like Infect. Infect is that game 1, of course, with Amulet, we are going to lose. Albeit Infect has a slightly better matchup against Amulet does than Hammer. Simply because they're able to protect their creatures a lot easier. So it's a little more difficult when it comes to Infect. But they're both trying to win at the same speed. And so they're very, very similar when it comes to how you approach the matchup. But I will agree with what you say. Post-board, it does get a lot easier because Force of Vigor is at house against this deck. And I don't think I pretty much refuse to register any less than 2 copies of Force in my board. So Force Vigor is an amazing card against the deck. And just all around right now is a very, very good card in the metagame. So
agreed.
Cool. All right, sweet. Let's get into some deck list review. So we do actually have some people who submit some deck lists.
Let's do this.
Maybe before we get into deck list review, I got to quickly thank my sponsors. I will start off with themanabase.com, your home base for everything Magic the Gathering. And the Mana Base is sponsored by Fusion Gaming Online, my favorite local game store. There's usually a deal of the week somewhere here. Every single week, you got to check out Fusion Gaming Online to see what the new deal is every single week. This week, I don't see anything, but usually there is a deal of the week. Anyway, Fusion Gaming Online is my favorite local game store. Remember, it's a Canadian site in Canadian prices. And I'm also going to thank Mana Traders, the premier place to rent Magic cards online. And you can support the channel, Coffee and MTG, by using my Mana Traders link in the description below. Or you can get 15% off your first 3 months using my coupon code Nikachu. And so let's get into it. So we've got, see how much time we have. Let's start off with a blue-green Tron list.
Gimme.
Be interesting.
This will be interesting. Okay.
Actually, hold on. Before we get into this, because not everyone likes to stick around for deck list review, why don't you let us know where everyone can find you and also find your podcast?
Sure.
All right. So so you can find me on Twitter at HouseOfManaMTG. And for the podcast, you can find that on Twitter at Titan_Talk2. And the podcast is available on Spotify as well as SoundCloud. I am currently in the works of trying to get it available on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Also for Spotify, if you were looking for the first episode, unfortunately, for some reason, there is some issue with the RSS feed. So if you want to listen to episode 1 of the podcast, where we talk about the origins of Grim Reclaimer Titan Vial, you can find that on SoundCloud.
So it's still available on SoundCloud. I have all links to find our special guests and their podcast in the description below. So if you love the Titan Talk, you're definitely going to find a lot more of it with the Titan Talk podcast.
This week we have quite a bit coming out for you guys. I'm not sure if we're having 2 pieces of content uploaded, but we're going to have a lot of content uploaded this week. We're going to be having guest Leviathan 1 and 2 coming on this week. He was the guest that we had on last week, but unfortunately due to some audio issues, we could not release the episode last week. It was a very, very good episode, so it sucks that we couldn't release it. So we had we're going to be interviewing him. He top 8'd the energy event last weekend going 4-0 in Legacy portion with Titan Post and playing in the modern portion Green Knight Reclaimer. So definitely excited to bring him to you guys. And of course, Jose and Fran will be having a again, just like we're having here, a debate on whether or not Amulet is playable right now. So yeah,
sweet.
Yeah.
All right.
As for me, you can find me on Twitter at JOSMONIZ8. This is my MTGO handle, MONIZ0801. If you ever face me or you just want to say hi.
Titan.
Expect Titan for the most part, yes. I'm increasing my range right now. I'm delving into Storm and Dredge, but mostly Amulet Titan.
If you see if you see me on Moto though, you won't see me in the modern queues. Just find me over in Vintage.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, we have Uro, the Titan of Tron. So,
I know
Academy
this is going to be a
Ruins,
spicy one.
Breeding
that's
Pool,
sick.
Field of Ruin, 2 Field of the Dead, Gemstone Caverns, 3 Island. But we do have the Tron lands, Mine, Power Plant, Urza's Tower, Waterlog Grove, 3 Ancient Stirrings. I guess it's like similar to Blue Tron.
Yeah.
But we are playing with, we do have 4 Primeval Titan in here, and 2 Primeval Titan and 4 Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, in addition to some regular Tron cards. Karn the Great Creator, to Ugin, Chalice of the Void, Expedition Map. It's actually like a mix of Titan, Eldrazi Tron, and Mono Blue Tron.
Yeah. So first things first, and I think this is a very good heuristic for deck building for the most part. And that's the thing I think it's the biggest quality that I bring to my lists, and being able to tune and trying to figure out like mana bases and the synergies that are happening. You are using 2 very good engines, but a lot of the cards that you're using are not they don't compensate each other's engine. So for example, if you want to be an Uro deck, you actively want to try and maximize the amount of colored sources you have. So in this case, if you want to make a Tron Uro deck work, you can adapt to cards like Simic Signet. Simic Signet feels like it would do much more than, say, your Talisman is doing, because Simic Signet actually allows you to ramp while fix your mana for Uro purposes, right? So if you want to be able to do both things, you have to try and understand, okay, so what's the glue that I can use to make these 2 strategies work together? If I would recommend it, I think Modern is just a free canvas, and you can literally play whatever you want as long as you have like the mastery and the knowledge of the format. However, if you were to play this, which at first I wouldn't recommend, but if you were to play this, I think you can adapt. You can make some smarter, for example, card choices. I think Simic Signet, if there is a deck that wants it, it's this one, right? Because you can leverage the Tron lands while also fixing mana for your Primeval Titan and your Uro particularly.
Looks like you are using Talisman of Curiosity, only 2x. Also, this one deals damage to them.
Yeah. I think Talisman is good when you want to maximize on 4-drops, but Simic does it just as well.
Right. So I agree. So if we're adding 4 of these signets, what do you recommend dumping?
I'd say Ugin doesn't really function with your main win condition of Uro and Primeval Titan, so I'm definitely down to shave one.
You can end up exiling your own stuff.
I'm not even necessarily sure you want to shave the Talismans though. I think those are fine on its own. I just think you can play. I think you'd play 4 signets over the first Talisman. I don't think you necessarily have to cut the Talismans. So
dump an Ugin.
I definitely go along the lines of cutting like 1 Ugin, maybe 1 Talisman of Curiosity, 1 Rift, and probably how many lands is the deck playing? I think this deck
25.
Seems considerably. Yeah, I think you could trim a land. I don't see the big benefit of Field of the Dead when you're only playing, if I'm not mistaken, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different lands. You can maximize Field, but if that's the case, I think you want to trim on one waterlogged grove, even though it's a blue and green source.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it costs you life to actually use might actually be a downfall. So I definitely consider trimming maybe one grove, one talisman, one cyclonic rift, and one Ugin for the 4 signets, and maybe work from there and see if it works for you or not.
And we're going to compensate with the grove with the signet anyway, so it's not like we're losing
exactly.
any blue-green sources anyhow.
Exactly.
Any thoughts, Jack?
So one thing that that appealed to me is are we really able to make Uro work in this deck? So like I mentioned earlier, the reason why Amulet does not play Uro is because it is very difficult for the deck to escape, and so I'm looking at the deck list, and that is one thing that to me, like you have maps, sure. You have
remand.
You have remand. You have your permission spells. You have a couple copies of stirrings, but then like I just it really just seems like it's not a card that really you want me taking advantage of. I could never see playing some number, but I don't think 4 is what I would be doing. Also, if you do want to leverage Field of the Dead, I don't think you need to be playing a more widespread variant of lands, right? So what I would be doing is I'd probably
covered island.
So I would definitely be splitting your lands. I would be playing some number of forests in your deck because you're playing green cards in your deck. It just seems incorrect to me to not play some number of Mystic Forest in your deck. I'm not entirely sure why we have any Academy Ruins in our deck. There might be a Mindslaver in the board. Can we look at this? There's not even a copy of Mindslaver, so I probably wouldn't even be playing Academy Ruins in this deck unless you're.
But it's a car in the Great Crater deck, so I mean, some artifact might get dumped or something.
Yeah, sure, but like the reason why Blutron plays Academy Ruins, right, is because it plays a Mindslaver lock.
Mm-hmm.
So and like that's why like something like Eldrazi doesn't play Academy Ruins because like it's not taking advantage of that, right? So.
Well, they don't play blue, period.
Well, true. But it's seems really more or less like that's just like not like it seems kind of win more to me. And so like I would probably like what I'd do is maybe turn like a breeding pool into maybe like one copy of Flooded Grove is what you could do. So
Maya Codes too.
Maya Codes can work. So if you do really want to leverage Field of Dead, I'd probably be trying to diversify your lands, even though it does seem pretty awkward doing so because again, 12 lands, half the lands that you're playing are Tron lands, right? And so that's going to occupy 3 names, but again, it's taking up half your mana base. So Field of Dead seems like a card that'd be very difficult to leverage, and I could even see maybe even going down to 1 Field of Dead, honestly, just to try and try to maximize it. But yeah, it's definitely a cool idea.
And again, I think I'm gonna repeat this advice for most lists. But the main secret to try and see like what to tinker is just play with your known meta, being MTGO or your LGS if it's available to, if you can play. Try and find what isn't working. Okay, so what am I missing in this deck? Am I missing? Usually, it comes down to 3 things. I'm missing time, I'm missing resources, I'm missing pieces. So it's time, resource, pieces. So I'm either losing way too fast before I assemble my combo, I don't assemble my combo or my engine with enough cards, I need too many cards to find them, and it's easily disruptible. So try and find like in these 3 axes, which one is your deck lacking the most, and try and leverage that with some card choices or some overall just shakeup of the strategy.
So this is sort of a follow-up question. Would Chromatic Star or Seer help fix your colors in the early game so you can drop Uro? Or
yes.
having early Tron? So
like, and feeding for escape. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
The Chromatic guys would make a lot of sense in this deck. And I think it would also give a lot more incentive to have Stirrings in your deck, because from what I'm seeing, Stirrings seems like a card that does not really fit too well in this deck.
You can't find Titan, can't find Uro.
Yeah, can't find Titan, and like also your Chalice deck, right? So you don't so you don't necessarily want to be playing
Chalice on one is a non-bow with your stirrings.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that I'd probably consider is playing, is maybe going down to maybe just like one Chalice, or maybe putting Chalice into the wish board and then playing the chromatic eggs in that spot instead.
That seems fine.
Cool, sweet list. Love it. Thank you very much for submitting list. Okay, do we have another Titan? Do we definitely have another Titan list here? And it's more traditional looking from Pedrofi.
Okay.
Ta-da! Can we see?
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I really love this.
Black green Titan, 4 Boreal Grazer, 1 Azusa, 4 Dryad, 4 Primeval Titan, 2 Abrupt Decay, 4 Explore, 2 Fatal Push, 3 Karn the Great Creator, and maybe we could hear some of your thoughts on Karn the Great Creator in Titan as well. 2 Nisa, Shadowed Bows. Does anyone know what this card does?
Yeah, I know. I've messed.
Oh, you guys, you're familiar with this. I have no idea.
We talked about this card a little bit when on the podcast. We talked about this card a little bit during Spoiler season, and it was definitely a card that it was pretty clear that this card does not fit an amulet, but in some deck like this, it definitely makes sense. The one deck that we thought that this card would make a lot of sense in is the Heartless Summoning Gitrog Titan deck, and it slots perfectly in that type of deck. And like you're playing a bunch of all these different utility creatures that you're making cheaper with Heartless Summoning, so it makes a lot of sense to play this Nissa in a shell like that.
Yeah.
4 Summoners Pact, 2 Timber Symbiosis.
Yeah.
Do you guys need to see the mana base?
I think it's self-explanatory for the most part.
Okay.
I do a small nitpick. If you're gonna play Field of the Dead, and you're playing 2 swamps, play a swamp, play a snow-covered swamp.
Again, it's so important.
It is a strictly better decision. Yeah.
We have a snow-covered forest, but we do not see the snow-covered swamp.
Yeah.
And
so here,
no cost at all. There's no
exactly.
Nothing yet.
Yep. So that's the first innovation. So if you look at the creatures and most of the spells, you would take this as an amulet list, right? Where the amulets were merely replaced by, say, Nissas, Fatal Pushes, and Decays. Mm-hmm. But you have to understand the reason why Amulet was built that way with that creature suit, to then try and understand what works and what doesn't, right? So Grazer and Azusa, for the most part, are amazing in Amulet Titan because of the nature of bounce lands. Bounce lands represent card advantage on its own, and they're able to leverage it with Amulet for mana. Mm-hmm. So that's where the biggest importance of Summoner's Pact comes in, right? Because sometimes you are tight on mana, or if you have an amulet and you're missing a couple of pieces, you actually need a card to get a Dryad or a Grazer. I think this deck, with the amount of mid-range threats it presents, say Dryad, Karn, Nissa, I don't think a Summoner's Pact will be extremely necessary. So you can be able to trim on a certain number of them. It's not as important in this deck if you have all these mid-range threats to be able to find a Titan. I do like the addition of Summoner's Pacting for the Nissa Ultimate. So you can actually pact for something, and then you can use Nissa's -5. I think that's an interesting scenario that can come up.
Well, and for anyone who doesn't know what this card does, because I most certainly don't. Okay, we got a black-green 2 generic for a Nissa Planeswalker that has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on Nissa. Not bad. Okay, so +1. Untap target land you control, you may have it become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste and menace until end of turn. Thank God it's until end of turn. I mean, for the people who have to play against this card, it's still a land. But -5, You can put a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2+1/+1 counters on it. Okay, so you can Summoner's Pact for a creature and basically show and tell it into play, basically.
Exactly. So when you're playing a mana base and a list that shares so much with Primeval Titan, you have to try and grasp, what am I missing? So what am I complementing with my additions that Amulet Titan doesn't have? So here you are sacrificing speed for interaction and a more diverse set of threats, right? You're playing Nissa, you're playing Karn, you're playing a more mid-rangey role with the pushes and decays. You want the game to go longer because you have more threats. By that, you have to weigh the options and see if it works or it doesn't for you. Whenever I was playing Amulet, I always found the splash to be a very difficult thing to maneuver because you have so many moving pieces. In this case, for example, this list is playing Handwar Battlements and Valakut. However, it is not playing Amulet, so it can't maximize on Battlements as well as Amulet lists do.
It's like clunky Amulet.
If you want to play an Amulet shell, but you are sacrificing Amulets for interaction, you have to revamp the whole deck, right? We're working with an engine here. It's the sum of its parts, it's much greater than the value of each part individually. So if you have to do some touches on the mana base, cut the slower cards that you are going to have more trouble interacting with. For example, there isn't that big of a need for like a card like Ghost Quarter if you're not able to Teleria West for it, right? If needed. Okay. So the same can be said for Battlements. The same can be said for a card like Radiant Fountain. Do you need Radiant Fountain as much if you're playing Fatal Push and Abrupt Decay? Maybe you don't. So maybe that's a consideration that you need to switch. Maybe you want to see
never
more
giving something haste, basically.
On the turn it enters. No, it will not. If you are so heavy on black, would you be more interested in more Verdant Catacombs? Just try it out, give it a look, see how it feels. Can I just look at the sideboard? I'm really interested in the Karn list, the Karn chill.
Maybe you could say a little bit about Karn, the Great Creator. So what makes this card see play in like Titan lists, period? What are the advantages of Karn, the Great Creator?
It's very good against every single piece of hate that can be thrown at it. So it circumvents Ashiok, it circumvents Gus, it circumvents Blood Moon in a way. And it gives you. I'm of the opinion that it's only as good as the static is in the meta.
Okay.
So, for example, I'm more inclined to sleeve up Karns when the static is good. Obviously, because that's the main role the Karn plays. But it also serves as a pre-Titan threat that they have to deal with, and they have to waste resources. So, what you lose to it is the ability. You lose a bit of speed in trying to enable Karn in your list, and you also lose sideboard options, which for me, when it comes to my deck building, it's very valuable. If I am going to play a Karn list, I really want to make sure that it's better than something that I would devote 15 sideboard slots to bring in at any given point. So I do like some of the I do like some of the cards, some of the choices. Damping Matrix is very good against Heliod, and it's definitely something that I've tried out and I've considered. So it is a bit awkward with again, not as much with this list, but for example, okay, it's just artifacts and creatures. Sure, I thought Planeswalkers as well for some reason. Never mind. Coding, that's a standard. Pithing Needle, standard too. I really like Sky Sovereign. I particularly like Sky Sovereign. I love the boat here because of Nissa, right? You can animate a land with Nissa and crew the Sky Sovereign. So I'm not sure if it was on purpose or not, but like those are the kind of micro interactions that you have to find to actually see if a list clicks for you or not, right? Yeah, I'd say it seems fine. It seems fine. Maybe some adjustments on the mana base, but other than that, I think it's most definitely good.
Yeah, I actually really like how this list looks. One thing I would do though is I would probably move these Thoughtseize in the board. I'd probably put them in the main and maybe move those pushes into the board. Simply because like you have the K as an answer to like a lot of things that push would answer as well. And just right now, like game one, I'd much rather value having a card like Thoughtseize in comparison to Fatal Push.
Mhm.
And so going back to Karn, right? So Karn. So when it comes to Karn and Amulet in particular, right? Karn is a card that is very metagame dependent. One of the best metas that it's shined in was the Ashley meta when Ashley decks were everywhere, because sometimes because Karn was not only was it a card that was going under Aether Gust, but it was also a card that when it resolves, a lot of the time was screwing with people's mana bases, simply just because of the static effect, right?
Yep.
Just like you said, Karn is very, very good when the static is good. And right now, in particular, if I were to play Amulet in an event, I would be playing the Karn list, simply just because it is very good against Belcher. It is a way to answer the more worrisome half of Heliod, because for me in particular, if I'm playing an event and I play against Heliod, I'm gonna play through the Infinite Life. So yeah, Karn's very good there. Karn, of course, being very good against 4-color Omnath decks, and just because like it's just a very, very solid threat against those cards. So yeah, Karn's a very, very good card right now. One thing I would do, and just say, I know you preach about this in Amulet, and I'd probably do the same thing here. I would probably be going on to one Valakut in this list, simply because it, again, I would much rather be able to maximize having black sources in the solid deck. And so with that being said, one of the cards I would first be cutting is, yes, this Battlements. I don't think it should be in the deck, but the second Valakut is also something I would very likely cut from this.
This has become a recurrent thing in the podcast and in our Twitters, and I detest Amulet lists with 2 Valakuts. I think if you are going to play a tapped non-green source, you better make it work. You better make it good on its own. And Valakut is horrible on its own, and it's dreadful on its own. And even with Dryad, Field is so much better than that it doesn't make sense for you to play 2. So it's kind of like my crusade against the 2 Valakut Amulet lists.
Yeah.
It started a while back, and it's
so there's no place for 2 Amulets in any list? It's just
I
basically
think there are places for 2 Valakuts and Amulet lists.
If you're playing a more heavier red splash,
yeah. If you're splashing red, I can defend it. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it's a dead card if you don't have a Dryad, and you really want you're all. If you're living in magical Christmas land, just play 4 Valakuts then. If you're always going to have the Dryads, you know what I mean?
Titan Shift.
Yeah, like that's the thing. You have to make.
This is the new Titan Shift.
Yeah, you have to make some sacrifices to the mana base, because you're not always going to have card X, card Y. You're more often than not, you might just not find them. And in my case, I've like the mana base was sort of exhausted in I try to make like certain I wanted like X green sources on turn 1. I wanted to minimize tapped lands in case I'm going to curve naturally. Like taking all of that into consideration, the second Valakut just felt excessive. It didn't feel necessary. So, but a lot of people just play them for commodity's sake. For example,
or they're just copying the mana base really from another Titan list, and then they're adapting the non-lands.
Which couldn't possibly be what happened here with some small tweaks. So that's why I kind of said, watch your mana base, try and see if it works, and if it doesn't, and maybe tinker with a few things here and there.
For everyone so for all the lists that you see 2 Valakuts in, what would you recommend be the card that you replace Valakut with?
It really depends. So, for example, for the most part,
slot for the most part,
I'd say it's almost a flex flop. So there isn't, for example, right now, I don't think the meta is necessary for a main deck Ghost Quarter, for example. I think Bojuka Bog is much more valuable than, say, the Ghost Quarter, even though it has its uses, right? So you can very easily just pass a Ghost Quarter into the sideboard. However, even if Bojuka Bog is more useful than Ghost Quarter, Bojuka Bog is a tapped source. Ghost Quarter isn't. So you kind of have to weigh the do's and don'ts of each choice. I tend to follow like pretty strict set of heuristics when building. So, for example, I think Castle Garenbrig is on par with Field of the Dead when it comes to card quality that increased in Titan decks. I think Castle Garenbrig is one of the best lands that you can play. And for the most part, I always try and play 4. I think, and if you're going to play 4, okay, putting it simply, I think lands and Amulet fall under 3 main buckets, I'd say. You have the castle bucket, you have the bounce land, and you have the toolbox. So if you, in the castle bucket, you'll place the Castle Garenbrigs, all the forests that you're playing, and all the fetch lands, because they serve as forests. So you want a critical mass of forests in order to maximize how many castles you're playing. So, for example, say the number I usually play is 7 to 8 forest cards for 4 castles, right? So that
what do you
takes
mean by
up
forest card. You mean like how snow-covered forests?
Yeah. So,
and
for example, this list is playing 1 Verdant Catacombs, 2 snow-covered forests, and 2 forests.
Okay. Oh yeah,
right?
that's true.
And
Gotcha.
2 overgrown tomes. So it's playing 7 forests. You know what I mean?
Okay. So okay, this counts as forest. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
in that case, it's fine. For example, like you need a critical mass of forests in order to make castles maximize the effects easily, right? Then in Amulet, you have the bounce land package. So you're looking at about 8 to maybe 9 bounce lands. And then the haste package that you choose can influence the number of bounce lands you're playing. Because if you're gonna haste with Slayer Stronghold, you need a Boros Garrison, and that changes the math. And then you have the toolbox. The second Valakut falls in the toolbox, and the toolbox range is usually the smallest one. So the second Valakut has to be better than any card that you'd put in the first 2, right? So the main point of comparison for Valakut is, I'd say, a basic forest or a breeding pool. If you feel like the second Valakut does more than that, sure, you can play it. From my testing, I felt that having an untapped source, one more untapped source, drastically changed some scenarios. And I've tried it out. I've literally had 2 Valakuts, one of each art, so I could know, okay, when was this one bad? When was this one good? You know, like
yeah, I was thinking about doing that. This is the extra Valakut in art. Exactly. I'll know when this has helped or screwed me.
No, I've done it. Right now, my Amulet lists are playing 2 Azusa and 3 Dryads, when the number is usually 1 and 4. I actually have 2 different Azuzas, so I know, okay, this one is in place of the Dryad. How well did it perform compared to?
And smart play testing.
Exactly. Like, try and make it work. Try and maximize like what you're testing. That's for the most part. I'd say that's it.
You also got the added on tilt factor for having mismatched cards.
That is true.
So,
what's all these mismatched cards for my opponent?
Right. One thing that said to me, and one thing that I like in these more or less like Titan decks that aren't Amulet is. I personally like having a one of Blast Zone in these types of decks just because it's a catch-all and it typically works out pretty well in terms of lists. Like we see it in Reclaimer. I believe it's in the Blue Green Titan deck. It might not be. But even going back to the Blue Green Titan deck from the start of the year with Okos and Once Upon a Time, the card just like it slides in pretty nice in the decks. The reason why this card does not see play in Amulet in particular is because, one, the cost to sacrifice it is pretty high, and also Amulet does not want to sacrifice lands. Because the most part is because of Field of the Dead. You want to have that critical mass of lands. So again, so that argument kind of contradicts what I'm saying here. because again, this is still a field deck, right? But these sorts of decks can more or less leverage sacrificing these lands better than Amulet. So I think you have enough resources to make 4 castles work. If you didn't, that's where I would have started. But in this case, I'd probably switch that second Valakut to a Blast Stone.
Yeah.
All right, so there was one other list, but there is actually a problem with it. Sorry about that, Amaskeg. There was some problem with your list, but I think this is all the time that we have right now for Decklist review and the show. It was actually a really good, insightful show that we had today. We went, especially even with Decklist review, we started now diving into why the deck works as it works and some common, you know, I would say the common problems people have with deck building, and you know why this is showing up in today's metagame. You know, the two Valakut thing. You know, I would look at 2 Valakuts and think nothing of it because I've seen so many lists play 2 Valakuts anyway, not knowing that the second Valakut is either win more or unnecessary. So again,
but it's still under discussion. It's still under discussion. The stronghold debate. The Titan stronghold has not reached a consensus yet.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So again, if you want to find today's guests, I got links to their Twitters in the description below. And don't forget, follow if you love Primeval, if you love Titan decks, follow their podcast. You can find them on Spotify. You can find them on SoundCloud. They've got it for you. And so if you want it, how often does an episode come out?
The episodes come out every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Don't want to miss it, because that's where you want to be for the latest and greatest talk and tech on the Titan decks. So again, I'd love to thank you guys for showing up today, and it was a really good discussion. And you know what? If I have another topic to bring up on Titan, I'd love to welcome you back again.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting us both.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Thank you for having us on.
No problem. All right, so this has been Nikachu, Merfolk Master, with the Titan specialist Jose and Jack talking about Amulet Titan in Modern.